A snowstorm sweeps across Washington, D.C. as a routine flight to Florida takes off. Suddenly, the aircraft starts shaking. 24 seconds later, it smashes into a bridge packed with cars and plunges into the icy river below. Despite the freezing temperatures, a desperate rescue effort is launched. How did a routine flight turn into one of the most horrific disasters in aviation history? Now, a team of experts will find out exactly what downed Air Florida Flight 90. Disasters don't just happen. They're triggered by a chain of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. The United States, Washington, D.C., January 13th, 1982. 12:30 p.m. Joe Stiley, an executive with a large telecommunications company, arrives at Washington National Airport with his secretary, Nikki Felch. Joe and Nikki are taking a business trip to Tampa, Florida. They're scheduled to depart at 2:15 on Air Florida Flight 90. Flying is a big part of Joe's life. He's a former Navy pilot, and his job involves regular trips around the world.
In those days, I was probably getting on a 737 and flying somewhere once to twice a week. It was almost a routine thing for me to be doing what I was doing that day.
Outside, the weather is anything but routine. Washington, D.C. is experiencing one of the worst winters in decades. Temperatures drop to 25 degrees as the snowstorm rages. Washington National Airport is just 3 miles south of Capitol Hill on the banks of the Potomac River. It's a major hub for flights from across the U.S. and Canada. On a normal day, more than 400 aircraft take off and land here. But today, the airport is struggling to stay open in the heavy snow. 1:38 p.m. All flights are grounded while snowplows clear the runways. The operation is expected to take an hour.
We regret to inform you that due to the adverse weather conditions, all flights will be grounded for at least an hour while snowplows clear the runways.
Air Florida Flight 90, a Boeing 737, is held up by the delay at Gate 12.
Seems like every year it gets worse and worse.
Yeah, I know.
I can deal with rain, but this snow is...
Captain Larry Wheaton is 34. He's a family man with 2 children. Roger Pettit, his first officer, is just 31. He's a former Air Force fighter pilot with an excellent record. But both men have less than 3 years' experience flying 737s. At 2 p.m., Flight 90 begins boarding 20 minutes late. The aircraft will be more than half full for the 2-hour flight to Tampa. 71 adult passengers and 3 young children are boarding. Many are helped by 22-year-old flight attendant Kelly Duncan. For her, the job is a dream come true.
I loved my life as a flight attendant. Whenever I went anywhere in my uniform, people would always comment about it, and it was something that I was very proud of doing and something that I really enjoyed doing.
Near Joe and Nikki are Priscilla Tirado, her 2-month-old son Jason, and her husband Jose. They're relocating to Florida, where Jose has a new job in the construction industry. 2:20 p.m. Captain Wheaton expects the airport to reopen soon, so he orders the ground crew to de-ice the 737.
Okay, guys, you can get started.
It is routine procedure to remove snow and ice from the aircraft before takeoff. but a string of further delays keeps Flight 90 at Gate 12 for another hour. Clearing the runways takes longer than expected. And then there's a backlog of flights. No one can do anything but wait. Outside, the snowstorm continues.
I could see snow accumulating on the aircraft and all around the aircraft. It snowed the entire time we were there.
When clearance to leave Gate 12 is given, there's another delay. Ice on the tarmac makes it difficult to move the 737.
Too heavy for this ice.
Captain Wheaton decides to help out with a blast of reverse thrust
Guys,
from
I'm
his
gonna put a little
engines.
reverse on it.
Are you sure?
No, don't worry, it'll be okay.
3:35 p.m. Flight 90 finally taxis to the runway, 1 hour and 20 minutes behind schedule. Flight attendant Kelly Duncan is relieved.
When we were finally moving away from the jetway, it was wonderful because I felt like we are finally on our way.
Wheaton and Pettit go through their pre-flight checklist.
Anti-ice? Off. APU. Running.
Flight 90 then falls in behind other aircraft in line for takeoff.
2 window exits at the center of the cabin and 2 doors at the front.
Boy, this is bad. Probably the worst snow I've ever seen.
Seatbelts are released as shown.
Both pilots can see snow on their wings. Pettit is concerned.
You know, it's been a while since we've been de-iced.
3:59 p.m. Flight 90 is cleared for takeoff.
Position and hold.
Flight attendants, please take your seats.
At the rear of the passenger cabin, Kelly Duncan straps herself in. Joe Stiley, Nikki Felch, and Priscilla Tirado are just a few feet away. 3:59 and 45 seconds.
Throttles.
The 737 finally rolls down the runway. But just seconds later, thrust readings jump past the target level for takeoff.
Oh God, look at that. That don't look right, does it?
Pettit responds by easing the throttles.
Yes, it is. There's 80.
But now it's taking longer than usual to reach takeoff speed of 165 miles per hour. And there are strange readings on the flight deck.
120.
Joe Stiley is worried.
We were nowhere near the normal speeds that I was used to feeling every week in a 737. Going down that runway was like riding in a backcountry road full of potholes.
Flight 90 eventually hits takeoff speed and lifts off the ground.
Me too.
Suddenly, the nose pitches up sharply and the aircraft starts to shake. In the cockpit, alarms warn the pilots that Flight 90 is about to stall.
Forward.
They only have seconds to act, or the 46-ton aircraft and the 79 people on board will fall out of the sky. Seconds after takeoff from Washington National Airport, Flight 90's nose pitches up dramatically and the aircraft starts to shake. Flight attendant Kelly Duncan doesn't think it's a serious problem.
Of course, I thought it was turbulence that we had come through before, so I wasn't worried about it.
But the pilots know they're in deep trouble. Flight 90's high nose position is creating so much drag that the aircraft can't maintain its speed.
Easy, all we need is 500.
If the 737 slows down too much, it will stall and then drop. Captain Wheaton orders First Officer Pettit to lower the nose by pushing the control column forward.
Forward.
But he can't drop the nose too far, or the plane will stop climbing.
Come on, just barely climb.
As the shaking intensifies, former pilot Joe Stiley fears the worst.
I remember vividly saying, how the hell do I get out of this airplane now? And knowing that it was too late, I was already kissing my rear end goodbye.
12 seconds after takeoff, Flight 90 has traveled less than a mile. A third of a mile ahead, the heavy snow has created a traffic jam on the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac River. Construction worker Marion Grant Jr. is on the northbound side. His truck has hardly moved for 15 minutes.
Traffic wasn't moving at all. Like we'll sit still maybe 3 minutes and we go 5 feet and 5 feet.
4 p.m. and 53 seconds. At an altitude of just 352 feet, Flight 90 suddenly stops climbing and starts dropping. Captain Wheaton jams the throttles forward for maximum thrust. But it's too late. Commuters on the 14th Street Bridge hear the scream of jet engines.
We're falling. Larry, we're going down. I know it!
Joe Stiley is knocked out as Flight 90's fuselage breaks into 4 sections.
I remember the sensation of blacking out, and I remember saying to myself, God help me.
Flight 90's wing has flipped Marion's truck over like a toy, but he stumbles out alive. The carnage on the bridge is horrific.
I saw a guy crushed to death, you know, and then I saw another guy, seemed like his head was decapitated and stuff like that.
Joe Stiley regains consciousness. His bones are broken in 67 places, and now he has just seconds to cheat death again.
The water was just rising into my nose and coming up fairly quickly. It seemed like forever to get my legs loose because the seats had collapsed. And then I reached over to try to help Nicky get free. And as I get to the rear of the airplane, I know that I'm free because I can suddenly see just a glimmer of light in the water. And then I knew I was free of the aircraft and started up.
Stunned witnesses gather on the bridge. A news cameraman records this footage just minutes later. The entire 737, bar the tail section, has disappeared. Joe and Nicky have made it to this island of wreckage, along with 4 other survivors. One is the young mother, Priscilla Tirado. Another is flight attendant Kelly Duncan.
I have no recollection of the impact. 1 minute sitting in a warm jump seat, the next minute in freezing cold water.
The water is just 1 degree above freezing. The human body can only survive in these conditions for about 30 minutes.
It hurts to be that cold. It feels like knives in you to be that cold.
Emergency services arrive minutes later, but their inflatable boats can't get through the ice. The survivors have escaped a plane crash, but they'll freeze to death if rescuers don't reach them within minutes. 6 injured survivors of Air Florida Flight 90 cling to wreckage in the freezing waters of the Potomac River. Rescuers can't get to them through the ice. A crowd watches as they struggle to survive. 4:06 p.m. The U.S. Park Police Helicopter Unit in Anacostia Park, 1.5 miles from the crash site.
Park Police Aviation, Officer Gailey. It's a tower. They're reporting a missing aircraft, 14th Street Bridge.
Pilot Don Usher is a combat-hardened Vietnam veteran. He springs into action with paramedic Gene Windsor. Eagle One, their Bell Jet Ranger helicopter, isn't designed for heavy rescue work, and visibility is near zero. But they're determined to help.
We did what we were supposed to do, what we were trained to do, and what the public expected us to do.
"4:10 p.m. 28-year-old Lenny Skutnik arrives at the crash scene. Lenny saw the commotion while driving home from his office job in downtown D.C. The sight is unnerving.
When we got down on the riverbank, it was kind of an eerie feeling. It was snowing, and you know that quiet when it snows, and someone screaming for help out in the river. Made your hair stand up in the back of your head.
Eagle One is almost flying blind. Don scans the ground for roads that he knows lead to the 14th Street Bridge.
The only visibility we possessed was looking through the chin bubble, what would be called slant visibility.
Gene ties together makeshift lifelines. 4:22 p.m. The 6 survivors have been in the freezing water for 21 minutes. Their limbs are numb. They can no longer move their hands. They're giving up hope. But then they hear Eagle One approaching.
I suddenly felt the whoomp, whoomp of a helicopter. Then the Park Police helicopter came into view. The relief I felt at that point is unimaginable.
I have never heard such a beautiful thing as the day that I heard that helicopter.
Don sees the survivors clinging to the tail section of Flight 90.
We realized as soon as we looked at them that every second counted between life and death to get them out of that river.
The first survivor Eagle One rescues is 41-year-old Bert Hamilton. Gene then throws down one of his improvised lifelines to flight attendant Kelly Duncan.
I just remember looking up into the sky and just seeing a rope hanging down from it. And I just pulled it around my back, and they pulled me out.
Don and Gene tried to speed up the rescue by dropping 2 ropes. Joe Stiley grabs one of them and wraps an arm around Priscilla Tirado, the young mother. Nikki Felch, Joe's secretary, grabs the other rope, but she's too badly injured to hold on.
It was the worst feeling because if there's any one person I'm going to try to help first, it would be Nikki, and I can't.
Seconds later, Joe loses his hold on Priscilla.
I didn't realize it at the time, but all the fingers in my left hand were already broken, and my arm was broken.
Eagle One drags Joe to safety. The crew knows that Nikki will be kept afloat by her life jacket. Priscilla is their immediate priority. After 30 minutes in the freezing water, her chances of survival are slim. Lenny Skutnik watches from the shore.
She was close enough where you could see the expression on her face. And her eyes just looked wild, and she looked like she was going into shock then.
And Priscilla slips from the life preserver. Traumatized, exhausted, and temporarily blinded by aviation fuel, she starts to drown. Lenny can't sit by and watch anymore.
It was just too much to take. I absolutely thought she was going to die if I didn't go in and get her.
Lenny jumps into the freezing water and drags Priscilla to safety.
I believe it's a human instinct. I didn't weigh it or think about it, I just did it.
Eagle 1 now returns to Nikki, but she's too weak to grab the life preserver. The crew responds with their most daring rescue so far. Jean steps onto the skid, grabs Nikki, and wrestles her to safety. At 4:35 p.m. The rescue is over. The sixth person clinging to the wreckage, whose hand is seen here, has disappeared. He's later identified as Arland Williams, a 46-year-old banker. 74 passengers and crew on board the 737 are dead, including Priscilla Tirado's baby son and husband. 4 more people die on the bridge, bringing the death toll to 78. 5 people survived the tragedy, but barely.
I had a skull fracture. My nose was broken, my cheeks were broken, my jaw was broken. All my fingers and thumb on my left hand were broken. My right leg was fractured. My left leg was shattered. Both feet were broken. Other than that, I was fine. Oh, and I had a hypothermia.
News of the disaster is broadcast around the world.
Some of the victims died on impact, most drowned in the icy waters of the Potomac River.
The question on the minds of everyone is, how did a routine flight turn into one of the most horrific air disasters in U.S. history? Now, by going deep into the investigation, we can reveal the chain of events that led to the crash of Air Florida Flight 90. At the time of the disaster, Bill Hendricks was the National Transportation Safety Board's Chief of Air Accident Investigation. He's a former U.S. Navy pilot with more than 20 years' experience as an air crash investigator. January 13th, 1982. News of the disaster reaches Hendricks just after 4 p.m.
Hi, Bill Hendricks.
It's one of the most important calls of his career.
I knew there'd be a lot of pressure on this investigation. It's here in Washington, D.C. A lot of congressional interest, a lot of media interest. It's the capital of the United States.
I'll get back to you.
Bill Hendricks and his team reached the 14th Street Bridge later that evening. The crushed cars indicate that Flight 90 came down steeply.
It hit onto the 4 or 5 vehicles and flattened them out like a pancake up down to their rims before it plunged into the water.
This is all they know for sure. Now they need to find out what triggered the disaster. There are many possibilities, from catastrophic mechanical failure to pilot error, even sabotage. But the snowstorm is the most obvious suspect.
It was just a gut feeling that somehow this weather had something to do with it.
But Hendricks knows this isn't the whole story. Dozens of other aircraft took off from the same airport on the same day without a hitch. Whatever happened to Flight 90 was unique. It's a mystery, one that'll be difficult to solve. The wreckage of Flight 90 and the clues it might contain are at the bottom of a frozen river. And both pilots are dead. So what happened in the cockpit will remain unknown unless divers find the black box flight recorders.
First thing we always look for are the recorders. From the flight data recorder, you get altitude, heading, airspeed, from the cockpit voice recorder. Get the last 30 minutes of conversation in that cockpit between the crew.
Early the next morning, U.S. Coast Guard vessels break through the ice and reach the wreckage. They join forces with the Army and Navy and launch a massive salvage operation, spearheaded by a team of 82 divers. Hendricks and his team set up headquarters for the investigation in a conference room at the nearby Marriott Hotel. While divers concentrate on recovering bodies, investigators interview more than 200 witnesses. What they discover will stun them and throw into question the safety of every aircraft that takes off in extreme winter weather. Investigators think that the crash of Air Florida Flight 90 could be linked to extreme winter weather, but they need evidence.
As an investigator, we're trained never to guess. That hunches are good, but you got to back them up with facts.
The team questions the ground crew who de-iced Flight 90 at Washington National Airport. Any oversight in their work could have left snow and ice clinging to the aircraft, with grave consequences. The lift an aircraft needs to fly is created by a smooth flow of air over the wings. A layer of ice or frozen snow disrupts the flow, reducing lift and increasing the drag dramatically. Experts call the problem contamination. The ground crew insists that Flight 90 was fully de-iced before it taxied to the runway. But as investigators probe deeper, they uncover an intriguing fact. The operator who de-iced the right side of the aircraft thought the air temperature was 28 degrees. But it was really only 25 degrees. As a result, he sprayed less than the recommended amount of de-icing agent onto the right side of the aircraft. The investigators are on the verge of a breakthrough. They examined the de-icing process in even more detail.
We're looking at the entire de-icing process. What was the mixture of the de-icing fluids? How was it dispensed?
They test the de-icing solution used on Flight 90 and discover something even more disturbing. The fluid contains only half of the de-icing agent glycol as it should contain. So the de-icing spray was somehow weaker than the operator's control panel indicated. How could this happen? The team examines every component of the de-icing vehicle used on Flight 90 and find their answer. A specially calibrated valve in the glycol delivery hose had been replaced with an unmodified valve. The result? A reduced flow of glycol to the nozzle. It wasn't just the right side of the 737 that didn't get enough glycol. It was the entire aircraft.
It was not a very thorough de-icing job that was done on that airplane. It was not that good. It was marginal at best.
But this is far from conclusive proof that Flight 90 was contaminated with snow and ice when it took off. Ground crews used the same de-icing unit on other aircraft without incident. So although substandard, it still might have done an adequate job. For Hendricks' hunch to hold up, he needs better evidence. His entire team is in for a shock.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna put a little reverse on this.
Captain Wheaton uses reverse thrust during pushback from Gate 12. Thrust reversers are normally used as a braking system when an aircraft lands.
Are you sure?
They should never be used before takeoff in wintry conditions for one simple reason. The reversers redirect the jet of hot air leaving the back of the engines toward the front of the aircraft, which can shoot a cloud of slush onto the wing and into the engine inlets. In sub-zero temperatures, the slush can refreeze in minutes. The use of reverse thrust is further evidence that snow or ice could have caused the disaster.
It was very poor pilot judgment to do it. Not a good idea.
Then Hendricks gets another break. A member of his team tracks down an extraordinary photograph. It's a snapshot of Flight 90 taken by a passenger in another plane at approximately 3:20 p.m., just 10 minutes after de-icing was finished. The image is grainy, but it shows that fresh snow is already on the aircraft. The photograph is further evidence that the 737 may have been contaminated after it was de-iced, regardless of how well the job was done. But now the investigation reaches an impasse. All the evidence gathered so far is circumstantial. It doesn't prove that snow and ice caused the disaster. The team still can't rule out mechanical failure or even sabotage. They need hard evidence, and that evidence is at the bottom of the Potomac River. By day 4 of the investigation, most of the bodies have been recovered. The focus of the salvage operation turns to the wreckage. The parts are taken to a hangar at Washington National Airport for detailed examination, but they yield no clues. And the 2 crucial black box flight recorders are still missing. Finding them is a daunting task. Divers are equipped with an acoustic homing device, but the tangled wreckage is spread over an area of dark, freezing water the size of a football field. Desperate for answers, the investigators turn to the survivors.
Survivors are in the airplane. They hear sounds, they feel bumps and grinds and hear noises. They supply an awful lot of information.
Joe Stiley describes how Flight 90 shook violently before it crashed, which confirms the investigators' suspicions. This could be the result of ice and snow disrupting airflow over the wings. Then, Joe reveals that the 737 seemed slow and sluggish during takeoff. But other aircraft didn't have this problem, despite the snowy conditions. Hendricks and his team are mystified. Then, 7 days after the crash, a diver picks up a faint signal. He follows it through the icy water until he reaches a tangled mass of wreckage. Carefully, he pulls away twisted pieces of razor-sharp metal and hits the jackpot. His flashlight illuminates one of the flight data recorders, and then the other. It's the moment the investigation team has been hoping for.
After the recovery, Seacrest lifted one recorder over his head in victory. A big moment for the salvage team after a week of frustration.
You've got to see me out.
All right.
When the word reaches the team that the recorders have been found and are being recovered, that is a very good piece of information.
Investigators rush the black boxes to their labs. After days of speculation, they're about to find out exactly what happened in the seconds leading up to the crash. They're anxious, but they also know they're about to listen to the voices of those who perished.
Every recorder that I've listened to is always an emotional occasion because of the tragedy involved.
Boy, this is bad. Probably the worst snow I've ever seen. You know, it's been a while since we've been de-iced.
The team is stunned to hear that both pilots can see snow on their wings, but they don't turn back for more de-icing.
I mean, And this one's got about a quarter to half an inch of snow on it all the way down.
I got a little on mine.
I was amazed, perplexed, wonderment, if you will, that under the regulations, the federal air regulations, you're not allowed to take off with snow or ice or frost adhering to your wings.
This could be why Flight 90's nose shot up just seconds after takeoff.
Easy, all we need is 500.
The Boeing 737 tends to pitch up sharply if the wings are contaminated with ice or snow.
S3E6.
But with all the mounting evidence, something isn't adding up for the team. They're confused by First Officer Pettit's comments about his instrument readings.
My God, look at that. Doesn't look right, does it?
To find out what was worrying him, they study the flight data recorder. Immediately, another mystery rears its head. They discover that survivor Joe Stiley was right. The 737 took 45 seconds to reach takeoff speed, 15 seconds longer than normal. If the aircraft was contaminated by ice and snow, this might slow takeoff a little, but not for 15 seconds. Something else was wrong with the 737, but they don't know what it is. They could be back to square one. They can think of only one thing that would slow a 737's takeoff dramatically: insufficient thrust from the engines. But why would a crew take off without powering up properly? The mystery can't be solved by examining the engines. They're still at the bottom of the Potomac River. And Flight 90 was fitted with a pre-digital flight recorder which didn't monitor thrust levels. There's only one option left. Investigators scrutinize the low-level engine sounds picked up by the cockpit voice recorder. Using a technique called sound spectrum analysis, they translate these sound frequencies into thrust readings.
Yeah, it's 1.7.
That's too low.
The results are shocking. Both engines were running at a thrust level, or EPR, of 1.7. But the 737's takeoff EPR should be 2.04. The pilots took off without sufficient power.
My God, look at that. Doesn't look right, does it?
But how could this happen?
Shoulder harness. On. Air conditioning back. Off. Start pressure. Up.
Investigators play the cockpit recording again and again, listening for clues.
The Guardia's not accepting.
Then they pick up on a small but important detail.
Pitot heat?
On.
Anti-ice? Off. APU? Running.
Can we hear that again?
Shoulder harness.
He said off.
Shoulder harness.
The recording is poor, but Captain Wheaton says off when asked about the engine anti-ice system.
Pitot heat?
On.
Anti-ice?
Off.
Hendricks realizes that one small word could solve the mystery. Thrust readings for each engine are produced by two sensors, one in the inlet and one in the outlet. Together, they produced thrust readings by measuring the ratio between air pressure at the front and the back of the engine. But if the engine anti-ice system is off, snow and slush could freeze up the inlet sensors. On some other 737s, this has caused the sensors to send pilots faulty thrust readings, readings higher than the actual thrust produced by the engines. If this happened to the crew of Flight 90, they could have unknowingly taken off with insufficient thrust. With two major pieces of evidence still missing, Flight 90's engines, the team can't prove that the anti-ice system was off. or that the crash wasn't caused by an engine failure. Finally, salvage squads lift the battered engines from the river. 13 days after the disaster, they're rushed to manufacturers Pratt & Whitney for examination. When investigators discover next rocks the aviation world. Even before it took off, Flight 90 was doomed. After days of searching, divers have recovered Air Florida Flight 90's engines from the Potomac River. The clues they contain could reveal if the disaster was caused by pilot error or something else. Technicians strip the engines down and search for any sign of a mechanical problem. But they find nothing. Then they inspect the anti-ice system. One by one, they check the tubes that carry hot air to key areas of the engine. The results are decisive. The valves inside are closed. The anti-ice system hadn't been turned on. But would this be enough to bring down Flight 90? To find out, the team carries out tests in Boeing's state-of-the-art 737 flight simulator. To their surprise, reduced thrust of 1.7 EPR is just enough to keep the aircraft flying. But then, when they factor in the problems created by ice or snow contamination, there's a breakthrough. Now, by rewinding the events of that fateful day, and by following the evidence uncovered during the investigation, we can finally reveal why Flight 90 crashed. January 13th, 1982. A series of factors combined to allow a buildup of ice and snow on Flight 90. The aircraft is sprayed with half the recommended amount of de-icing agent. Further delays caused more snow to gather on the 737. And the use of reversed thrust might have sprayed slush onto the wings and critical thrust sensors. 23 minutes to disaster. Wheaton and Pettit leave their engine anti-ice system off.
Anti-ice? Off.
As a result, thrust sensors in both engines freeze up, causing them to send misleadingly high readings to the cockpit. 14 minutes to disaster. The pilots notice a thick layer of snow on both wings.
I mean, this one's got about a quarter to half an inch of snow on it all the way down.
But contrary to regulations, they don't turn back for more de-icing. 1 minute and 3 seconds to disaster. Pettit is confused by unusual readings on the flight deck.
Oh God, look at that. That doesn't look right, does it?
But his captain doesn't abort takeoff. 24 seconds to disaster. Flight 90 takes off with dials indicating a thrust of 2.04 EPR. But because critical thrust sensors are frozen, the real thrust is only 1.7 EPR. Ice and snow clinging to the wings disrupts airflow dramatically, reducing lift. This changes the aerodynamics of the 737, causing its nose to pitch up sharply. The resulting drag reduces speed and lift even further. 8 seconds to disaster. The loss of lift reaches a critical point. At an altitude of just 352 feet, the 46-ton aircraft stalls and falls out of the sky. 4:01 p.m. Flight 90 hits the 14th Street Bridge. The disaster claims 78 lives, including those killed on the bridge. Following the disaster, aviation authorities issue a series of directives to improve all aircraft de-icing procedures. They include specific measures to ensure that thrust sensors don't become blocked by ice. flying is now safer for every aircraft that takes off in winter weather.